welcome to another edition of Sports Zone. We are kicking it off with the important stuff like we usually do. Studio 90, I'm joined by Aaron, and probably the biggest news, at least that we've covered on Studio 90 this year, broke this Friday morning. Arsene Wenger out as Arsenal manager after 22 years. People have been calling for it for a long time. I don't think a lot of people thought it would happen, and especially right now. And Aaron, what do you sort of make of the decision to get rid of Arsene Wenger at this point in time?
Well, pretty much for all the Arsenal fans that I've talked to, it's very mixed. I think it was obvious that it was time. Some people may have said it was time a few years ago, but definitely when you look at the results, Arsenal in sixth place, I think there definitely a change needed to be made. And I think, even though a lot of people were surprised that Arsene Wenger ended up stepping down, I still think that, people were just seen it coming just because Arsenal were in sixth place. And, these mixed feelings come from the fact that Arsene Wenger, 22 years as manager of Arsenal, unprecedented when you look at modern times. And his first 10 years doing such a great job transforming that club into the, huge club that we see today. But obviously the last few years have been tough. For me, it's also very mixed. I mean, you look at the past few years, it's been tough, but you can't look past what he's done for Arsenal Football Club. So, while, it was shocking to see him step down after 22 years, I think, after Arsenal being in sixth place this year and a lot of the performances this year, I think that, it was time for him to go.
Yeah, certainly. You mentioned the legacy, sort of the stadium, Emirates Stadium, sort of he built that, financed it pretty much by himself, revolutionized the club. It's going to be interesting, sort of an end of an era, certainly, along this tenured manager in the Premier League, managed over the most games. It's going to be interesting not seeing him on the sideline, but sort of taking a look at maybe who's going to replace Arsene Wenger. There's a couple of names that have been thrown around, some maybe having more validity than others, going from, Brendan Rodgers, Alan Pardew, Carlo Ancelotti, Massimo Allegri, all these names being sort of thrown around. And the Arsenal job, it's a big job, but it's also going to be a really tough job. Aaron, who do you think sort of should be the top couple candidates to replace Arsene Wenger?
Well, you definitely mentioned some names. I think it's important to, think about realistic candidates, because I've seen names like, Allegri and Simeone thrown out there that just, definitely guys that aren't going to leave their club to go manage Arsenal. So definitely when you're Arsenal, you got to look at more realistic candidates. I think a few names, Patrick Vieira, Arsenal legend, currently managing at NYCFC Major League Soccer. He's done a great job with them, and even though he's young and pretty inexperienced, I think that he's definitely a favorite for the job. And you also look at Mikel Arteta, who is a former Arsenal player, assistant right now at Man City, and he's gotten a lot of good reviews as far as being a good manager. But as far as experience, guys, I think Luis Enrique, who managed Barcelona, who's currently out of a job right now, is definitely a guy that they're going to look at. So there are a ton of names that have been thrown out there. Claudio Ranieri, Thomas Tuchel, although he might go and manage PSG. So definitely a ton of names being thrown out there, and it's very interesting to see, which candidates Arsenal are going to narrow it down to, and in the end, who they end up choosing.
Yeah, it's a sort of a coveted position, and who I think Gazidis and sort of Stan Kroenke and that ownership group decide to appoint will sort of send a big message about the future of Arsenal. They can go young, they can sort of go old with an established guy. I think based on sort of some of the messages they've been sending, they may go for a younger guy like a Patrick Vieira, like a Mikel Arteta, and sort of have somebody potentially build another legacy. But it will be interesting to see. And Wenger, certainly not done yet, has a couple of games left in the season in the Premier League and still something to play for that he's never won. A European Cup, I think, will transition to that Europa League. A big semifinal matchup between Atletico Madrid and Arsenal. Olympique Lyon and Salzburg are playing in that sort of other semifinal. And this sort of, the Europa League obviously always a second fiddle sort of to the Champions League. But when you have a tie like Atletico Madrid and Arsenal, it sort of brings a little bit of eyeballs to the Europa League. Do you think this will be, or how do you sort of see this first tie going?
Sorry to say for Arsenal fans and Arsene Wenger, I would love for Arsene Wenger to go out with the Europa League. I think that would be great for him. But you look at the quality of this Atletico Madrid team, and it's tough to see a way that Arsenal are going to win this tie. When you've got guys like Antoine Griezmann up top and, an Arsenal defense that has looked shaky at best this season, I really can't see a way for Arsenal to win this, especially the fact that Arsenal haven't even gotten a point away from home in 2018 in the Premier League, let alone going to Madrid. So I definitely think Atletico Madrid are the favorites in this tie and definitely the favorites to win the tournament.
Certainly, and that ironclad defense will be tough to break down. And when the Arsenal defense is sort of weakening goals left and right, I don't think they'll be able to score enough goals to keep up with that one. But it's certainly setting up for an exciting week of soccer because you have the other two Champions League semifinals being played. We talked about them last time: Bayern Munich, Real Madrid, and then Roma and Liverpool. Interesting ties there. Also, some domestic cups have sort of been resolved. We have the final of the FA Cup has been set. Manchester United defeated Tottenham 2-1 yesterday, and Chelsea defeated Southampton 2-0 today to sort of set up a big sort of blue blood type final for the second year in a row. Chelsea reaching the final, Manchester United reaching it for the second time in the past 3 years. So sort of both of these clubs maybe looking to salvage something from their season. Do you see this, any side sort of having an advantage in that final?
Well, you mentioned both teams have sort of had a disappointing season, but I definitely think Manchester United are the favorites going in just because, they are higher in the table and because, Chelsea have had a very interesting season. Antonio Conte, it looks like he's going to leave at the end of the season. There's a lot of, questions surrounding that club, so I definitely think that's going to affect them going to the final. I think Manchester United, they won the League Cup last year. The previous year they won the FA Cup. I definitely think they've been good in domestic cups over the past few years, and they played very well versus Spurs. So I definitely see Manchester United as the favorite, but this tie can go either way just because both teams, they're really going to want to salvage the season with an FA Cup because it's the only trophy that they can win. So I think both teams are going to come into this with their best lineups, resting up, looking ahead. But I think if you had to pick, Manchester United would be the favorites.
I think I would tend to agree with you based on sort of form of both teams going into the final. And with a lot of the domestic leagues sort of wrapped up, it'll be these European Cups and domestic cups that'll have a lot of the intrigue over the next couple weeks. I think that'll do it for us for this segment of Studio 90, but stick around for more Sports Zone after this.